Wanted you to kill him,
Yeah, he wanted me to kill him.
to make it look like a suicide.
Alex murder. My wife and child have gone badly.
That Alex Murdoch was this prominent, wealthy, entitled attorney.
Since the dawn of civilization, one's family name and origins have played a significant role in determining their place in society. For those born into wealth, life often comes with built-in privileges, connections, affluence, and opportunities that most people could only dream of. This social hierarchy has persisted for centuries and can be seen even in small towns across America today. These communities are often dominated by families with deep roots, where the family business and their influence have grown over generations, making them well-known figures in the town. This is not just a story of murder, it's a tale of power gone wrong, a family caught in the crossfire of their own making. The Murdaugh family murders is a saga where the line between victim and villain blur and justice is anything but certain. For over a century, the Murdaughs were a powerful legal dynasty in the area. Over the last 85 years, a member of the Murdaugh family has held the position of district attorney in Hampton, solidifying their influence in the local legal system. Their law firm, established in 1910, became a cornerstone of the community. The Murdaughs were not just wealthy, they had deep ties with law enforcement, to the extent that anyone facing legal trouble in Hampton was likely to cross paths with a Murdaugh. However, like many powerful families, the Murdaughs had secrets, dark secrets that began to unravel in 2019 following a tragic boat accident that claimed the life of a young girl. This incident became the catalyst for exposing a web of lies, corruption, and suspicious deaths that would eventually lead to the downfall of the Murdaugh dynasty. Hampton, South Carolina, is a small town with a population of just over 2,800 people. In such a small community, everyone knows everyone, and many families, like the Murdaughs, have been rooted there for generations. The Murdaughs first established themselves in Hampton in 1910 when Randolph Murdaugh Sr. moved to the town and founded his civil law firm. A decade later, in 1920, he became the district attorney, and the Murdaugh name began to carry significant weight. His son, known as Buster, followed in his footsteps, becoming the district attorney in 1940, and the Murdaugh legacy continued with Randolph III, who had 3 sons, Randy, John, and Alex. Our focus today is on Alex Murdaugh, whose actions would ultimately lead to the collapse of the Murdaugh name. Born into old money, Alex always knew he wanted to join the family business. After graduating from the University of South Carolina in 1990 and completing his law degree in 1994, Alex returned to Hampton to work at the family firm. The Murdaughs' prominence extended beyond the courtroom. They had cultivated close relationships with local law enforcement, often inviting sheriffs to hunt and fish while discussing cases, further cementing their status as the town's most influential family. Alex was well respected in Hampton, both by the citizens and the police. He married Maggie, whom he met at USC in the late 80s, and the couple had 2 sons, Richard, known as Buster, and Paul. While there's little public information about Alex's relationship with his family before the 2019 boat crash, what we do know is that this incident was not about Alex, but his youngest son, Paul. On February 23, 2019, like many teenagers in Hampton, Paul Murdaugh and his friends were looking to spend their Saturday night together. The group consisted of 3 couples, Paul and his girlfriend, Morgan Dowdy, Anthony Cook and his girlfriend, Mallory Beach, and Anthony's cousin, Connor Cook, with his girlfriend, Miley Altman. Wanting more than just to hang out at someone's house, the group planned an evening out. Paul offered to take them out on his father's boat, and they decided to attend a local oyster roast, followed by dinner at a low-country boil, making it a night to remember. In South Carolina, spending time on the water is a way of life, and it's not unusual for people to head out on boats for some fun. However, the night took a troubling turn when Paul Murdaugh brought alcohol aboard. Earlier that day, Paul, who was just 19, stopped at Parker's, a local gas station. Despite being underage, he used his older brother Buster's ID to purchase several cases of beer. The cashier didn't notice the fake ID, and Paul left the store triumphant, as seen in security footage that captured him celebrating as he returned to his truck. Later that evening, around 6:30 p.m., Paul and his friends gathered at the Murdaugh family's river property, affectionately known as Murdaugh Island. Alex Murdaugh, Paul's father, gave him permission to take the boat out for the night. Though the boat was small and not ideal for 6 young people, especially those who were drinking, the group set off around 7 p.m. They spent the first part of the evening drinking and enjoying each other's company as they made their way to an oyster roast. Once at the roast, the group docked the boat and spent the next 5 hours eating shrimp, oysters, sausage, and potatoes. Typical fare for a low-country boil. But alongside the food, alcohol was flowing freely. Although none of them were of legal drinking age, they frequently returned to the boat to grab more beers from their cooler, then slipped back into the festivities. By the end of the night, the group was heavily intoxicated, particularly Paul, who became belligerent. Just after midnight, the group decided to leave the roast and return to the boat. Concerned about Paul's level of intoxication, Anthony Cook, one of the friends, offered to take over driving. But Paul, insistent that it was his boat, refused to hand over the controls. Exhausted and ready to go home, the others reluctantly agreed to Paul's plan to make one more stop at a bar in downtown Beaufort. Reluctantly, the group followed Paul to the bar. Even though no one else wanted to go, security footage from the bar shows the group arriving, with the girls and Anthony trailing behind, clearly unenthusiastic about the detour. While Paul and Connor went inside to take a few more shots, the others waited on the docks. They were only at the bar for about 10 minutes, but that was enough time for Paul to become even more intoxicated. As the group made their way back to the boat, Paul's drunken state was evident. The footage also captured a tender moment between Anthony and his girlfriend, Mallory Beach, who had known each other since childhood. Tragically, as they reboarded the boat, tensions escalated. Anthony confronted Paul, telling him he was too drunk to drive, but Paul refused to listen. According to Miley Altman, one of the friends, Paul's behavior changed drastically when he drank. He became someone they all referred to as Timmy, a drunk alter ego that took over when Paul was intoxicated. Morgan, Paul's girlfriend, urged him to stop and let someone else drive, but Paul stubbornly refused, asserting his control over the boat. Mallory, feeling increasingly unsafe with Paul's reckless behavior, asked to get off the boat, but they were too far out in the lake for that to be an option. Paul's aggression escalated. He began yelling at Morgan, calling her names, and even slapped and spit on her. His friends watched in horror as Paul spiraled further into rage. At one point, Connor Cook took over driving to calm things down, but Paul soon wrested back control, determined to be the one in charge. As tensions mounted and Paul's behavior grew more abusive, the group was desperate to get home, but instead of complying, Paul defiantly pushed the throttle forward, speeding the boat towards a treacherous, narrow part of the river known as Archer's Creek. The creek was poorly lit, and the boat's lights were dim, forcing them to use flashlights to see ahead. The atmosphere on the boat grew tense as Paul continued to speed through the darkness, with everyone holding their breath, hoping to make it back safely. Suddenly, the R.C. Berkeley Bridge loomed ahead, barely visible until it was too late. Traveling at around 34 miles per hour, the boat slammed into a wooden structure called a dolphin piling. The impact was brutal. For 33 seconds, the boat crashed repeatedly against the bridge and surrounding structures, making it nearly impossible for anyone to stay aboard. Finally, the boat ran aground on the bank of the creek. As the dust settled, the group scrambled to check if everyone was okay, but they quickly realized that only 3 of them were still on the boat: Morgan, Miley, and Connor. Paul, Anthony, and Mallory, who had been seated at the back, had been thrown overboard during the crash. Moments later, Paul and Anthony surfaced and joined the others on the bank, but Mallory was nowhere to be found. Panic set in as they called out her name, desperate for a response, but were met with nothing but silence. The horrifying reality began to sink in. Mallory had disappeared into the water. At 2:20 a.m., Connor Cook made a frantic call to 911. The distressing cries for Mallory in the background of the call paint a vivid picture of the group's terror as they faced the grim possibility that their friend was gone. First responders arrived quickly and immediately began searching for 19-year-old 16-year-old Mallory, but with over 20 minutes having passed since the crash, hope was fading. The focus shifted from the group's injuries. Morgan had hurt her hand, and Connor's jaw was badly fractured, to the desperate search for Mallory. Anthony, Mallory's boyfriend, was especially devastated. Moments before, Mallory had been sitting on his lap, laughing and flirting. Now she was gone, swallowed by the dark waters. A police officer placed Anthony in the back of a patrol car to calm him down, but his grief was overwhelming. He was coming to terms with the fact that Mallory might not survive. His voice, filled with despair, can be heard asking the officers if they were still searching for her, clinging to the faint hope that she might somehow be found alive. Anthony also urged his mother to call Mallory's parents, Renee and Philip, who were still unaware of the tragedy that had unfolded. As the reality of the situation began to settle in, Paul, still in his boxers, was seen walking alongside a police officer, oblivious to the full magnitude of what had just occurred. When Anthony saw Paul after the crash, anger consumed him. Paul Murdaugh belonged to one of the most influential families in South Carolina, deeply intertwined with the local law. Anthony even expressed to the officers that he doubted Paul would face any repercussions for what had happened that night. The police were well aware of the Murdaugh family's prominence, and this knowledge weighed heavily on the situation. As Paul was momentarily out of sight, the officers managed to calm Anthony down a bit, even offering him a cigarette, but Anthony's thoughts soon returned to his missing girlfriend, Mallory. Meanwhile, dashcam audio captured Paul Murdaugh asking the officers if he could use their phone. The officer retrieved Paul's phone from the grass, and Paul made a call to his grandfather, a former district attorney and one of the town's most powerful lawyers. Allowing Paul to make this call was highly irregular. In any other fatal boat crash involving a drunk driver, the police would have immediately seized the phone as evidence, preventing the driver from using it. But Paul's last name afforded him privileges others wouldn't have. Further deviating from protocol, the police didn't take Paul's clothes or wallet into evidence. Another courtesy likely extended because of his family's influence. Despite the gravity of the situation, Paul wasn't remorseful. He remained belligerent, even taunting the officers, and recounted how Paul got in an officer's face, challenging him with, "You think you're a bigger man than I am?" Shockingly, the officers didn't administer a field sobriety test to Paul, despite his erratic behavior. Instead, they asked Connor Cook to take one, which he refused. It was later revealed that at least 3 members of the law enforcement team that responded to the scene were connected to the Murdaugh family, raising further questions about the special treatment Paul received after the crash that took Mallory's life. Eventually, the group was taken to the hospital, though it was difficult for the officers to convince Anthony to leave before Mallory was found. When they did get him to the hospital, it was around this time that Mallory's parents arrived at the scene, only to be met with the devastating news that their daughter was still missing. At the hospital, as Paul was treated for minor injuries, a Department of Natural Resources DNR officer attempted to question him about the crash, but before they could get far, Paul's father, Alex, and his grandfather entered the room and shut down the conversation, asserting their roles as his attorneys. They knew that the more Paul talked, the worse his situation would become. Paul's aggressive behavior continued, forcing the hospital staff to restrain him. At 4 a.m., over 2 hours after the crash, Paul's blood alcohol level was still more than 3 times the legal limit. While at the hospital, Alex Murdaugh took the opportunity to give legal advice to the other 4 people involved in the crash. He went to each of their rooms, instructing them to stay quiet and not discuss what had happened. Even Connor, with a fractured jaw and in a wheelchair, was stopped in the hallway by Alex, who told him not to say a word. Despite the severity of the incident, Paul was released from the hospital that night and allowed to go home, a stark contrast to the typical procedure where a drunk driver involved in a fatal crash would be immediately arrested. Meanwhile, Mallory's body remained missing. Days turned into a week, with her family enduring an agonizing wait, hoping to recover their daughter. Finally, on Sunday, March 3rd, a week after the crash, Mallory's body was found by fishermen about 5 miles from the crash site. Her family, though devastated, was grateful to finally begin the grieving process and lay their daughter to rest. In an interview, Mallory's mother, Renee, described her daughter as headstrong, a lover of animals, and the life of the party. Mallory had a special bond with her parents, and her father fondly recalled how she could dress up like a lady but wasn't afraid to go hunting with the boys. Mallory's funeral was held that Thursday at Open Arms Fellowship Church, where the community gathered to honor her memory. Yet, even as the town mourned, there was a growing unease. Weeks had passed, and Paul Murdaugh still hadn't been arrested. The Beach family, fearing that the Murdaugh name would protect Paul from facing consequences, took legal action. They filed a lawsuit against Parker's, the gas station that sold Paul the alcohol, and against Alex and Buster Murdaugh for allowing Paul to use Buster's ID. They were determined to see someone held accountable, driven by the fear that without this legal push, Paul might escape justice entirely. In response to the lawsuits filed by Mallory Beach's family, Parker's, the gas station, denied knowingly selling alcohol to a minor. The Murdaugh family also fought the suit, claiming that Buster had no idea Paul was using his ID to buy alcohol. They even went so far as to assert that Paul wasn't the one driving the boat the night it crashed, that Connor Cook was actually at the wheel. This narrative conflicted with witness accounts, which consistently placed Paul as the driver, except for a brief moment when Connor took over while Paul was yelling at his girlfriend. Despite these denials, justice for Mallory's family finally seemed within reach when Paul Murdaugh was charged on April 18th, what would have been Mallory's 20th birthday. Paul faced 3 counts of driving under the influence. It took nearly 2 months for the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources, DNR, to bring these charges, and many believed public pressure expedited the process. If convicted, Paul could have faced up to 25 years in prison. However, Paul wasn't treated like most felony suspects in Hampton County. Typically, those charged with felonies are handcuffed, taken to jail, and then brought to court. But the Murdaugh family arranged for Paul to bypass jail entirely, going straight to court for booking an arraignment. Even the standard procedure of wearing handcuffs in court was waived. When a deputy attempted to cuff Paul, the prosecutor intervened, stating it wasn't necessary, a clear sign of the family's power. Paul's mugshot was also an exception. Instead of being taken to jail, his mugshot was snapped on an iPhone 7 in the courthouse. After his arraignment, Paul was allowed to go home on a $50,000 bond to await trial, which could take years to come to fruition. As 2019 ended and 2020 began, Paul remained a free man in Hampton, quietly lying low, but soon the case would explode into the national spotlight under tragic circumstances. On June 7, 2021, Alex Murdaugh returned to the family's 1,700-acre property around 10 p.m. It was a quiet, rural area with vast stretches of land and few neighbors. The only sounds that night came from the dog kennels situated away from the house. When Alex approached the kennels, he made a horrifying discovery. His wife, 53-year-old Maggie, and his son, 22-year-old Paul, had been shot to death. Maggie and Paul lay lifeless close to each other on that hot June night. In shock, Alex called 911, then reached out to his brothers. When they arrived, they saw Maggie and Paul covered by white sheets, struggling to comprehend what had happened. Crime scene investigators worked for hours, collecting evidence and trying to piece together the events that led to the murders. Alex, devastated, could barely speak. He had to call Buster, the oldest son, who was living in Rock Hill, to deliver the terrible news. But Alex was so overcome with emotion that his brothers had to take over and break the news to Buster that his mother and brother were dead. The South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, SLED, took over the investigation, uncovering some startling details. Based on shell casings found near the bodies, investigators determined that 2 different guns were used, a semi-automatic rifle and a shotgun, suggesting there were 2 shooters. Paul and Maggie were shot between 9 and 9:30 p.m., shortly before Alex returned home. According to Alex's account, he had been visiting his mother across town, checking on her since his father father was in the hospital. His mother, suffering from dementia, was alone that evening, and Alex claimed he was ensuring she was okay. From the outset, Alex Murdaugh was a person of interest in the case, though his brothers vehemently denied the possibility that he could have committed such an atrocity. As if the family hadn't endured enough, Alex's father and Paul's grandfather passed away from natural causes just days after the double murder, deepening the family's grief. The murders of Paul and Maggie Murdaugh quickly became national news, sparking widespread speculation. The day after the murders, authorities assured the public that there was no ongoing threat, implying they had a suspect in mind. This led many to believe the murders were somehow connected to the boat crash. Some even suspected someone close to Mallory Beach might have sought revenge. However, Mallory's parents immediately provided their DNA to investigators, quickly ruling themselves out as suspects. Mallory's parents shared that some people had approached them, suggesting that Paul's murder was the ultimate justice for their daughter, but they rejected that notion. Mallory's father insisted that neither Paul nor his mother deserved to be brutally murdered, and that they too deserved justice. This raised the ultimate question: who killed Maggie and Paul? Was it Alex Murdaugh? Did he orchestrate the murders, or have someone assist him? Or was it an act of vigilantism by someone seeking revenge for the boat crash? Paul had received multiple threats over the years, so it was a plausible theory. However, as of now, these murders remain unsolved. The intense media coverage of the case brought renewed scrutiny to the Murdaugh family, leading to revelations that would further tarnish their already damaged reputation. One such revelation came from an incident that occurred in 2015, 4 years after the boat crash. On July 8th of that year, a man named Ronnie Capers was driving down Sandy Run Road in Hampton County at around 4 a.m. His headlights illuminated the road ahead, and as he drew closer, he realized what he was seeing: the lifeless body of a young man lying in the middle of the street. Ronnie quickly called 911, and when investigators arrived, they found the body of 19-year-old Stephen Smith. Stephen had a large laceration across his forehead and a depression in his skull above his right eye. Initially, investigators couldn't determine whether it was a hit and run or if Stephen had been shot in the head. Notably, there were no tire marks or car parts on the road, an unusual circumstance in a typical hit and run. So, how did Stephen Smith end up in the middle of the road? Investigators were puzzled by this as well. The answer seemed to come later when they discovered Stephen's car 3 miles down the road. SLED, South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, conducted a search and reported that the car's gas tank door was open with the gas cap hanging by its side. The doors were locked and the key found in Stephen's pocket was used to unlock the car. The vehicle was in park, the battery was functional, but the car wouldn't start. It appeared that Stephen had run out of gas and had begun walking to find help. During this walk, it was theorized that a passing vehicle, possibly a semi, struck him with its mirror and sped away. However, not everyone agreed with this theory. Stephen's shoes were still loosely on his feet when his body was found, a detail that seemed inconsistent with a high-impact hit-and-run, where shoes often fly off. Some speculated that Stephen might have been shot, but there wasn't enough evidence to support this theory either. Stephen's mother was particularly skeptical of the hit-and-run explanation. She found it hard to believe that her son, just 6 miles from home, wouldn't have called someone for help, especially since his cell phone was still in his pocket. The fact that his shoes remained on his feet also didn't sit right with her. As questions mounted, so did the rumors. Some people believed it was a hit-and-run, while others suspected Stephen was the victim of a hate crime, possibly shot. Despite these differing opinions, Stephen's death certificate, issued on July 14th, listed his cause of death as blunt force trauma, possibly involving a truck. This conclusion didn't sit well with many, especially given the disagreements among doctors, the coroner, and investigators. The investigators and coroner suspected foul play, but the doctor who performed the autopsy insisted it was a hit and run, even though no definitive evidence supported this claim. The only rationale for ruling it a hit and run was that Stephen's body was found on a road. You might wonder what this tragic event from 2015 has to do with the Murdaugh family. Well, after Stephen's death, rumors began circulating that a Murdaugh was involved. Not Paul, but his older brother, Buster. Both Buster and Stephen attended the same high school. Stephen's mother even heard this rumor and reported it to investigators. This wasn't an isolated claim. Over 40 different people mentioned Buster as a possible suspect. While small-town rumors often lack credibility, it's notable that these accusations surfaced well before the Murdaugh name became tarnished by the boat crash and subsequent murders. Why would so many people point the finger at Buster? Adding to the intrigue was an account from someone who claimed to have spoken to Stephen on the night of his death. This individual said he and Stephen were seeing each other and that Stephen had called him that night, saying he was about to run out of gas and was being harassed by some guys in a pickup truck. Another suspicious detail emerged when, shortly after Stephen's family was notified of his death, they received a phone call from Randy Murdaugh, Alex's brother. Randy offered to represent the family as their attorney, free of charge. The Smith family found this offer strange. Why would a man they'd never met before call them immediately after their son's death, offering to help out of the kindness of his heart? Stephen's father was particularly suspicious, and in hindsight, this offer seemed even more questionable once Buster was named as a person of interest. The Highway Patrol, which typically doesn't handle homicides, took over the case. After hearing from numerous people who named Buster as a suspect, they tried to reach out to him, but he never responded, and the investigation into Stephen Smith's suspicious death went cold for 6 years. However, 3 weeks after the murders of Paul and Maggie Murdaugh in 2021, the case was reopened. SLED stated that while investigating the Murdaugh murders, they uncovered information related to Stephen Smith's case, prompting a reinvestigation. As of now, no one has been charged with Stephen's death, and the Murdaugh family continues to deny Buster's involvement. The case remains unsolved, but it highlights the eerie pattern of the Murdaughs being connected to tragic events. First the boat crash, then the double murder, and now the suspicious death of Stephen Smith. Just when it seemed the Murdaugh saga couldn't get any stranger, another mysterious death emerged. In February 2018, a year before the boat crash, the Murdaughs were linked to yet another tragedy involving their housekeeper, 57-year-old Gloria Satterfield. Gloria had worked for the Murdaugh family for years, starting when Buster and Paul were just babies. Paul affectionately called her Go-Go, and she called him Paul Paul. Gloria was more than just an employee. She was considered part of the family and loved her job. But everything changed on February 2nd, 2018. While walking up the stairs outside the Murdaugh home, one of the family's dogs allegedly jumped on Gloria, causing her to fall down the brick steps. The 911 call made by Maggie Murdaugh captures the urgency of the moment, with Paul taking the phone from his mother to speak with the dispatcher. Gloria's family rushed to her side in the hospital, where she remained in a coma for 3 weeks. They frequently asked her what had happened, but she was never able to respond. Tragically, Gloria never regained consciousness and passed away on February 26, 2018. At Gloria's funeral, Alex Murdaugh approached her grieving family with a promise. He expressed deep sorrow for their loss and assured them that since the accident happened at his house and involved his dogs, he would ensure they were taken care of financially. He offered to help them find a lawyer who would sue him, promising that the family would receive a significant settlement. Trusting Alex, Gloria's sons believed he would honor his word and ensure they were financially supported. However, a year passed, and Gloria's sons had yet to see any money. The Murdaugh family, preoccupied with the boat crash in 2019 and the murders of Paul and Maggie in 2021, hadn't followed through on their promises. Then, in September 2021, another shocking incident would occur, adding yet another layer to the Murdaugh family's already complex and troubled legacy. On this seemingly ordinary day, Alex Murdaugh was driving when he suddenly got a flat tire. He pulled over to assess the damage when a truck pulled up, offering help, but as Alex's back was turned, the Good Samaritan shot him in the head. The injury was serious enough that Alex was airlifted to a hospital in Georgia, and the news of the shooting quickly spread, causing a national sensation. With Paul and Maggie already dead, and now Alex shot, it seemed like someone anyone might be targeting the Murdaugh family, people began to speculate whether a vigilante was out to eliminate the family that had corrupted their town. However, suspicions arose when SLED announced that Alex's gunshot wound was superficial. Then, just 2 days after the shooting, another bombshell dropped. Alex released a statement saying that the murders of his wife and son had pushed him to make regrettable decisions. He announced his resignation from the family law firm and revealed that he was entering rehab for a long-standing opioid addiction that had worsened since the murders. This confession left many in shock. No one had known about Alex's addiction or the extent of his troubles. Soon, it was revealed that Alex had been stealing millions of dollars from his family's law firm for years, with the most recent theft occurring the day before the shooting. The firm urged him to resign. Alex's brother Randy, who also worked at the firm, expressed his shock and disappointment, stating that while he loved his brother and supported his recovery, he couldn't condone or excuse Alex's actions. With his wife and son dead, his financial crimes exposed, and his career in ruins, Alex's life was spiraling out of control, yet questions remained about the roadside shooting. On September 10th, the nation was stunned again when 61-year-old Curtis Eddie Smith was arrested in connection with the shooting. Eddie, a distant relative of the Murdaughs who had previously been represented by the family in a legal case, was accused of shooting Alex. Shortly after Eddie's arrest, Alex confessed that he had hired Eddie to kill him so that his surviving son, Buster, could receive a $10 million life insurance payout. According to Alex's attorney, Alex's life had been driven by addiction, leading him to steal from his firm and plot his own murder. Eddie's account of the day, however, differed. He claimed that Alex had asked him to bring his truck to Alex's parents' house under the pretense of needing work done. When Eddie arrived, Alex had a gun and begged him to shoot him. Eddie refused and tried to wrestle the gun away, but during the struggle, the gun went off, wounding Alex. Eddie's actions after the incident raised suspicions. He admitted to disposing of the gun, which cast doubt on his version of events. Alex's attorney maintained that Eddie had intended to kill Alex, but the plan went awry. It was also alleged that Eddie was Alex's drug dealer, though Eddie denied this. Following these revelations, Alex was arrested on charges of insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, and filing a false police report. For the first time, the people of Hampton saw Alex Murdaugh in court, wearing a jumpsuit and handcuffs, but the story didn't end there. As investigators delved deeper into Alex's financial crimes, they uncovered a shocking betrayal related to Gloria Satterfield's death. The promised settlement for her family had become yet another vehicle for Alex's fraud, revealing the extent of his moral bankruptcy. After Gloria's death in 2018, Alex referred her sons to a lawyer, his best friend from college, Corey Fleming. Trusting Alex, the sons followed his advice and turned over the representation of their mother's estate. But the next day, Alex filed the settlement and kept the payout a secret. Gloria's sons never saw a penny, and Alex pocketed $4.3 million, money that should have gone to Gloria's family. When Gloria's sons learned of this betrayal, they filed a lawsuit against Alex, demanding the money they were owed. Authorities also reopened the investigation into Gloria's death and the handling of her estate. This case revealed just how twisted Alex Murdaugh had become. Instead of helping the family of a woman who had worked for him for nearly 20 years, he exploited their grief for financial gain. As more than 50 charges piled up against Alex Murdaugh, he found himself in jail on a $7 million bond. His once powerful family name could no longer protect him, and his financial crimes had left him broke. Even if he were convicted only on the lesser charges, it was likely Alex would never see freedom again. The case surrounding the Murdaughs is far from over. Stephen Smith's death is still under investigation, and although the details remain murky, investigators believe they uncovered something related to his case while looking into the murders of Paul and Maggie. Gloria Satterfield's death is also being scrutinized, and while it's unclear if foul play was involved, it's evident that Alex saw an opportunity to exploit her death for personal gain. The murders of Paul and Maggie also remain unsolved. Although Paul wasn't a sympathetic figure, his murder deserves answers. Given the financial pressure Alex was under, combined with the life insurance policies on Maggie, it's not far-fetched to speculate that Alex may have orchestrated their deaths for financial gain. The botched assisted suicide adds another layer of complexity. Why do Alex and Eddie have conflicting stories about what happened that day? It's possible that the staged suicide was intended to divert suspicion from Alex's involvement in his family's murders. Furthermore, rumors of Alex's involvement with a low-country gang called the Cowboys, linked to his alleged opioid addiction, suggest that he may have been entangled with dangerous people. Some speculate that unpaid debts could have led to retaliation against his family, while others believe Alex orchestrated the murders for financial reasons. The truth remains elusive, and this case raises more questions than answers. As the story continues to unfold, it's clear that the Murdaugh family's fall from grace has had far-reaching consequences. The once prominent family, whose influence spanned generations, is now synonymous with corruption and tragedy. The name Murdaugh, once a symbol of power in Hampton, South Carolina, is now a reminder of the destruction they caused. The Murdaugh legacy appears cursed, and as more details emerge, the full extent of this curse may finally come to light. Thanks for watching. If you love uncovering mysteries, hit like and subscribe to Secret Sleuths. Turn on notifications so you never miss our next investigation.